Welcome to this module of EPG Pathshala. I'm Professor Sharda Srinivasan, Dean of the School of Humanities at the National Institute of Advanced Studies, which is in the Indian Institute of Science campus in Bangalore. And I'm talking today for the course on Indian culture, art and architecture of India, and I will be speaking specifically about Chola art and bronzes. You've already had a module which covers the broader facets of Chola art and sculpture. The Cholas were one of the most remarkable of medieval dynasties. In fact, John Key describes them as one of the most remarkable medieval dynasties anywhere. And they had huge number of accomplishments in the artistic, political, and literary spheres as testified by thousands of inscriptions and a very vibrant administrative, mercantile, and maritime presence. Their art is very rich, involving sculpture, painting, and bronzes. So the learning objectives are to explore the historical background to the emergence of South Indian bronzes, and particularly Chola metal icons, and to explore the technology involved in the making of Chola and South Indian bronzes and their art historical classification. Metal icons were made for public worship known as Utsava Murtis, which were taken out in festival processions outside the sanctum according to agamic practice in southern India. From about 300 AD to 1700 AD, metal images were cast under different dynasties all over South India, such as the Pallavas, the Cholas, the Pandyas, and the Vijayanagara and Nayaka dynasties. Images of the different faiths of Hindu or Brahmanical, Buddhist and Jain were widely cast. Amongst these, the bronzes made by the Chola dynasty from about the 9th to 12th century rank as unparalleled masterpieces of sculptural art. The early Chola bronzes of the 10th to 11th century from the Tamil region rank amongst the most renowned Indian artistic expressions. The Nataraja bronze is one of the most celebrated of icons, believed to depict the Hindu god Shiva dancing with the drum of creation in one hand and the fire of destruction in the other hand, described as the Ananda Tandava or the dance of furious bliss. We will first look at the historical background of the emergence of and making of South Indian metal icons and leading up to the historical background to the Cholas. South Indian metal icons such as the Nataraja bronze were intended for ritual processional worship. The making of processional images followed Shaiva Siddhanta and Agamic practices. The deity in South Indian images, according to the Agama texts, can be realized in two forms, one being the Achala Murti or the immovable image installed in the shrine, usually of stone, wood or stucco. The other, the Utsava Murti made of metal or wood, is the movable image taken out in processions and during special festivals. In the Shiva temples, the Achala or immovable image is the aniconic manifestation of Shiva, the Lingam or cosmic pillar, whereas the processional images of metal are the anthropomorphic manifestations, such as Shiva with the consort Parvati. The 5th to 10th centuries in Tamil Nadu also saw the emergence of a rich and evocative body of Tamil Bhakti poetry by numerous poet saints such as Appar, Sundarar, Manikavachakar, and the poetess Karaikal Ammayar. The Nayanmar were the saints who worshipped the Lord Shiva, and the Alvar were the saints who worshipped the Lord Vishnu, such as the poetess Andal, who worshipped Vishnu, the deity associated with preservation. You're looking at a beautiful bronze here of Manikavachakar, the celebrated mystical poet saint, who is seen here holding a manuscript. And this is one of the specialities of the Chola bronzes, that not only were many deities given life to in bronze and metal, but they also very beautifully depicted the many poet saints in their various forms which also gives a certain human quality to the bronzes and rather naturalistic quality, as seen in this very fine depiction of Manika Vachakar with a very otherworldly expression on the face. The Pallavas, originally feudatories of the Andhra dynasties, ruled in the Tamil region from the 5th to 9th century with their initial capital at Kanchipuram. For the first time under the Pallavas, freestanding monolithic shrines were hewn from a single piece of rock, such as the 5 Rathas at Mahabalipuram, which also influenced the later colossal Rashtrakuta rock-cut monolithic temple of Ellora in Maharashtra. It was under the Pallavas that landmark artistic and other innovations were made, which were to influence the artistic trends not only in southern India, but also in Southeast Asia. Under Mahendra Pallava, who ruled between 590 to 630 AD, unique innovations were made in rock-cut excavation, especially in the Chengalpattu district, at sites such as Mamallapuram and Mahabalipuram. We also see the emergence of metal icons under the Pallavas, such as this beautiful image of Shiva as Natesha, or the Lord of Dance, with the leg lifted in the Urdhva Janu posture. And this image is found from Kuram in Chengalpattu district, along with some associated copper plate inscriptions, which are dated to the time of Parameshwara Varman. And on this basis, art historians such as Nagaswamy have attributed that bronze to the Pallava period. The Choras were one of the most remarkable early medieval dynasties. The Choran dynasty emerged from Tanjavur under Vijayalaya Chola in 850 AD. It rose to preeminence after Vijayalaya Chola's son Aditya vanquished the Pallava ruler Aparajita Varman and took power around 875 AD. The term Imperial Cholas refers to the direct lineage of Vijayalaya Chola, including the monarchs such as Rajaraja and Rajendra Chola. By the time Rajendra Chola ascended the throne in 985 AD, the Chola kingdom had extended over large parts of South India. These included the Chera and Pandya kingdoms, while the Ganga territory in southern Mysore was also annexed. Rajaraja built the colossal granulite temple of Brihadishwara at the capital of Tanjavur, which is one of the tallest monuments in Asia at 216 feet. The Brihadishwara temple also has the largest number of temple inscriptions in any Indian temple in Tamil and Sanskrit. The Brihadishwara temple has meticulous and elaborate descriptions which record the donations made by Rajaraja Chola and his queens, and it also lists the sources of temple revenue and staff maintaining the temple, including temple cleaners and dancers and musicians. And it records that as many as 400 dancing girls were dedicated to the Brihadishwara temple. It also throws some light on some of the artisans who worked at the temple, such as Perintachan and others, and also gives a lot of information on the other craft communities who were linked to the temple. Under Rajaraja, the Chola expansion began with inscriptions claiming that he sent an expedition to capture the Maldives, while Sri Lanka was made a Chola province under him. A copper plate record also eulogized his naval conquests as far as Kedah in the Malay Peninsula. Rajaraja Cholan patronized the setting up of a Buddhist vihara at Nagapattinam by the Southeast Asian Sri Vijayan king from the region of the Malay archipelago. Although the Chorans were predominantly worshippers of Shiva, images related to the worship of Vishnu and Jain and Buddhist bronzes were also widely patronized in the Tamil country and southern India. We now touch upon the patrons of Chola art and bronzes. The Imperial Chola period has been regarded as an artistic watershed during which metal images, including several masterpieces, were cast in great profusion. Apart from the monarchs Rajaraja and Rajendra, mention must also be made of several remarkable Chola queens who were great patrons and who were responsible for the building of numerous important temples and commissioning of important bronzes. According to inscription, over 60 bronzes were dedicated to the great Brihadishwara temple by Rajaraja and his queens. However, sadly, only 2 remain in the temple today, a splendid Nataraja at 1.35 meters high and with consort Sivagami, which are displayed during special festivities at the temple. A celebrated Chola masterpiece of the Rajaraja period is of Shiva as Vrishabhavahana Deva, or his pastoral form with the consort Parvati and missing bull Nandi, which is in the Thanjavur Art Gallery. These images have been correlated to inscriptions in the Svetaranyeshwara temple in Thiruvengaru, which suggest that such a set of images were donated in 1011 and 1012 AD in the period of Rajaraja. Here, Shiva is depicted beautifully with his arm leaning on the missing bull and with the leg crossed over, and the coil of his turban is also very clearly and beautifully demarcated, while Parvati stands very gracefully by his side. We now come to Rajendra Chola, who was the successor to Rajaraja Chola, and inscriptions claim that Rajendra Chola, who ruled between 1012 to 1044 AD, won naval battles over the Sri Vijaya kingdom of parts of Sumatra, Bali and Java. They also boast of conquests by Rajendra right up to the Ganges, going into the Pala domains. Rajendra shifted the capital to Gangaikonda Chorapuram, the Chola town of the one who brought the Ganga river there, with a colossal temple, and which remained the capital from 1025 AD for some 250 years. Several beautiful bronzes were also commissioned by Rajendra Chola, such as a Bhikshatanar, which is in the Thanjavur Art Gallery. It seems as though it was through the efforts of the widowed Chora queen, Sembian Mahadevi, who lived sometime between 940 to 1006 AD, and who was a great patroness of temples and bronzes, that the Nataraja icon came more prominently into vogue in Chola art, especially in sculpture. There is a beautiful Nataraja sculpture in the temple at Koneri Rajapuram, the Uma Maheshwara temple at Koneri Rajapuram, which she built and dedicated to her late husband Gandharaditya Chola, who fasted as a devotee of Shiva to death. And you also see the Nataraja sculpture coming prominently into some of her temples, such as Adithurai. Sembian Mahadevi also had a great sense of history, and she is said to have rebuilt earlier brick temples and retained the inscriptions from the earlier temples. Indeed, it is quite extraordinary that the queen was held in great renown, and there is a town known as Sembian Mahadevi which was named after her, signifying the high regard in which she was held. And indeed, an inscription of Rajendra I mentions the offerings for worship made to deified images of the Chola Dowager Queen Sembian Mahadevi. So this suggests that she had attained a high status whereby images of her were taken out in temple procession at special festivals, indicating the deified status that she enjoyed. It is of course hard to decipher which of the bronzes may be connected to the portrait bronzes of Sembian Mahadevi, since very few South Indian images and Chola images have inscriptions, except for one image of Devi which has an inscription of about 917 AD from Karaiviram. There are very few inscriptions on Chola bronzes. However, one art historian has surmised that the Freer Gallery of Art Devi may well be an image of Sembian Mahadevi. It's also quite extraordinary that there were numerous patrons amongst the Cholas who were women. As pointed out by Nagaswamy, at the coronation, Chola queens were also crowned and enjoyed rights such as the right to rule and to own property. The Chola princess Kundavai, sister of Rajaraja, circa 11th century AD, was another remarkable patroness, particularly of Jainism and Jain temples. Inscriptions record numerous donations made to temples by women from different strata as well. And Chola goddess images are often depicted with the sacred thread, another indicator of the general respect accorded to the feminine. And we also saw this in the beautiful bronze from the Freer Gallery, which is attributed to be a portrait of Sembian Mahadevi by Deheja. We now come to the aspect of technology of Chola and South Indian bronzes. South Indian statuary bronzes are made by the Sire Perdu or lost wax technique, which has a long history in the subcontinent, probably going back to the Mohenjo-daro dancing girl of the Harappan period. The lost wax process of Madhu Chehista Vidhana is described in the Gupta era text of the 4th century or so, the Manasara, in the 68th chapter. It is also described in the Manasollasa, which is attributed to the Western Chalukyan king Someshwara, who lived sometime between 1124 to 1125 AD. Indeed, the legacy of casting bronzes following conventions going back to the Chola period still survives in the little village of Swamimalai, 30 kilometers from Tanjavur. So to describe the lost wax process or the investment casting process as described in the Shilpa Shastra texts, the lost wax casting process is, broadly speaking, one where first a wax model is made of the image to be cast, and this wax model is literally carved into the form of the image. Then the wax model is covered with numerous layers of clay, 2 to 3 layers of clay to form the mold. And then the mold is heated and baked so that the wax is then melted out. And this leaves behind a hollow which takes the shape of the icon to be cast. And inside this ensuing hollow, the molten metal is then poured in. The metal then solidifies to form the icon, and it is then retrieved by breaking the mold. And thus in this process, each icon which is formed is totally unique. We now go over to the workshop of the Sthapatis in Swamimalai, who follow age-old conventions going back to Chola times. The hereditary community of Sthapatis or icon makers have the status of Silpacharis or master craftsmen. And there you can hear them at work, filing away on the finished bronzes and bustling about with the various very magical processes of casting. In southern India and under the Cholas, the images were made by the solid casting process, whereby the model is carved from a solid piece of wax, and that is still followed in Swamimalai by the Sthapatis. And they also use the palm leaf or odiole to mark out the measurements for the casting. The mold is made around it and is called karu, which literally refers to the womb, which is also an idea that one sees in the Charaka Samhita, whereby the icon seems to emerge from the womb, as it were. The karu is then heated to expel the molten wax, and then the molten metal is heated in large crucibles, and the mold is packed into the ground to consolidate it, and then the molten metal is poured into the hollow cavity, and this solidifies to take the shape of the lost model in wax. In Tamil inscriptions, they also describe this as Ghanamaga, alluding to denseness or solidness of the casting. And there seems to be a preference for the Ghanamaga or solid casting for the main images. Another aspect of the study of Chola bronzes is that of the compositional analysis, to look at how the bronzes were made and to look at how metals were alloyed to make up the casting. This is a very fine image in the Government Museum, Chennai, of Nishumba Sudhani, a form of Durga who is dramatically depicted with 8 arms holding the cock, snake, bell and shield, and she has below her feet the demon Nishumba who she has destroyed. It is also interesting that there is an inscription of Aditya Chola of the 10th century which mentions the worship of Nishumba Sudhani, and this image can be attributed to the early Chola period. I had undertaken analysis of this image using a technique called inductively coupled plasma atomic emission spectroscopy by undertaking microdrilling and then subjecting it to spectrochemical analysis. And the image was found to contain 7% tin, 10% lead and 1.5% zinc. So it is a leaded tin bronze, and the addition of lead would have ensured that the casting was more fluid so that it could take on all these very complex shapes such as the 8 arms and so on. And it's a very dramatic casting with a great sense of motion. We now come to the question of the ritual proportions of bronzes. Very often South Indian bronzes are described, particularly in the present day, as Panchaloha or 5 metal icons. But in practical terms, you cannot have icons with such a large number of alloys, or in fact, you cannot have castings with a large number of alloys. And indeed, analysis of the South Indian images show that they are in fact about 80% of them leaded tin bronzes, which is basically alloys of copper, lead and tin, and some are also brasses or alloys of copper and zinc. So it appears that the description of Panchaloha is more a Shastraic notion rather than literally 5 different alloys. And in fact, according to the Swamimalai Sthapatis, the Panchaloha prescription refers to trace additions of silver and gold, most for the sake of Shastra, which is added to the bronzes or brasses, and that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, they cast such icons for the clients with the major alloy compositions and then just pinches or traces perhaps of, if they require it, of gold and silver. You're also looking at a microstructure of a bronze which clearly shows the very coppery color of the alloy and the lead segregating into the interdendritic spaces. And in this case, there's also some mold impregnation since it's an unfinished casting. We come now to some of the stylistic aspect of Chola bronzes. If we try and look at what we might consider as the highlights of the Chola style, one very striking feature is that they are rather simple and very graceful and naturalistic. And there's a great sense of movement which comes from the fact that the dance tradition seems to have been very well developed under the Cholas. We only have to look at the Brihadishwara temple to see the depiction of the 81 Karanas of the dance of Shiva, and later the Chidambaram temple, the 12th century temple, which has the depictions of the 108 dance Karanas along with descriptions from the Natya Shastra. So the prevalence of a very rich tradition of dance, which of course today has evolved into the Bharatanatyam tradition, is something that would have contributed significantly to the ways in which the bronzes are depicted. And Parvati typically is very beautifully depicted with her hand in the Kapita gesture from Bharatanatyam and the other hand in the Dola Hasta, and she stands with a slight flexion or bhanga, which also adds to the sense of movement and poetry of the form. So there's a great plasticity and grace and elegance, and there is also a certain otherworldly beauty. And again, we also saw in the depiction of Shiva as Rishabhavahana, the way in which the hand was very beautifully clasped as if he was leaning on a bull. So it's a combination of a very beautiful stylization following the Talamana canon, as well as a rather lovely naturalism that combines to give this aura of the Chola bronzes, along with the facial expressions and the gestures and the mudras being delineated quite beautifully. The themes of the Chola bronzes are also very varied and diverse and rich. We have the icons of Shiva and his different forms, along with Parvati and Skanda, the Somaskanda image. We also have images of Ganapati, and there are also numerous images of Vishnu and his consorts, such as Bhudevi and Sridevi. And we also see the incarnations of Vishnu, such as Krishna and Rama, Sita, and Hanuman and Lakshmana, also being depicted as Utsavamurtis. And of course, the portraits of the Shaivite saints whom we have mentioned, and the Vaishnavite saints such as Andal. And there is also a whole range of Buddhist and Jaina bronzes. For example, we are looking at a rather fine image of Shiva as Tripurantaka in the Tanjavur Art Gallery, where the demon or Apasmara is below the foot of Shiva, and the deer seems to just leap out of his fingers again in a very naturalistic and beautiful way. Well, the pièce de résistance as far as Chola bronzes are concerned is the Nataraja, who is described in Chola inscriptions quite simply as Adavalan, the one who dances, and in the hymns of Appar and Manikavachakar as Kutan, or the dancer who dances in Tillai, the little temple dedicated to the worship of Nataraja, which then of course also comes to be known as Chidambaram. Ananda Kumaraswamy, the renowned geologist turned art historian of Sri Lankan Tamil descent, wrote in the 1920s in his celebrated essay The Dance of Shiva, Shiva's dance represents his 5 activities or the Panchakritya: Srishti or creation, Sthiti or preservation, Samhara or destruction, Tirobhava or illusion, Anugraha or salvation, whereby Srishti or creation is depicted by the drum, and Samhara or destruction by the fire, while the cycles of perpetual cosmic creation and destruction beautifully encircle the image. And underfoot is the dwarf demon Apasmara, who is associated with ignorance. And he further writes that the Unmai Vilakam, the 13th century Tamil text, tells us that creation arises from the drum, protection proceeds from the hand of hope, from fire proceeds destruction, the foot held aloft gives release. This is poetry, but nonetheless science, which is a rather lovely depiction. And it also calls to mind the words of T.S. Eliot and Burnt Norton, who wrote, "At the still point of the turning world, there the dance is, neither arrest nor movement." One should also add that the lost wax process itself seems to have had a metaphoric connotation. For example, there is a beautiful verse by the woman poet saint Andal, where she compares the lost wax process itself to the rain clouds, and very movingly evokes the devotional bhakti to Vishnu or Venkatesha, where she writes, "O rain clouds, liquid wax within," and comparing it to the dark grey clouds, the mold to the dark grey clouds, rain down on Venkatam, where the handsome Lord dwells. So it's very fascinating that not only do the images have an intense visual metaphoric quality, but the lost wax process itself invoked this sense of a metaphoric connection between the human and the divine. I also wanted to point to the usefulness of technology in terms of helping us to further probe the stylistic attributions and to aid us in the study of history of art itself. A technique that I used in the study of South Indian bronzes was lead isotope ratio analysis, where we undertook to measure the lead isotope ratios of different representative bronzes of different schools from Pallava and Chola and Vijayanagara periods. And the idea being that the isotopic ratios tend to be different based on the differences in the source of leads. So, because of the fact that lead has distinct isotopic ratios for different sources, it could be used in a way to tell apart the metal sources of different objects by which they could be classified. Because we must remember that unlike organic material like charcoal, for metals there is no absolute method of dating them. And in this case, the South Indian bronzes are also solid cast, which also makes it difficult to date them on the basis of clay cores and such like. What was interesting was that the lead isotope ratios clearly identified that Pallava bronzes had distinctive lead isotope ratios from the Chola bronzes. And this was also quite useful because sometimes there is a fair amount of confusion between Pallava and Chola bronzes. And for example, this image, because of the fact that there are not many inscribed Pallava pieces, so often art historians had problems actually attributing any bronzes at all to the Pallava period, such as Douglas Barrett. But this image of Natesha from Kuram in the Government Museum, Chennai, was found to have isotopic ratios consistent with the Pallava period. And this also looks very Pallava in the depiction of the sashes and such like. But another very extraordinary finding from the analysis, which you could read further in the reading list of my publications, was the fact that the Pallava examples of Nataraja, of Shiva dancing with the leg extended in Bhujangatrasita Karna, were already in vogue by this time. The typical depiction of Nataraja with the leg extended is what we described as Bhujangatrasita Karna. And usually we assume that that form of Nataraja with the leg extended really comes into vogue in the Chola period, and that's where the sculptures come into vogue. But it looks like there are one or two bronzes which fit the Pallava trends from lead isotope analysis, and hence we may surmise that the Nataraja was already cast in the Pallava period. There are also some technical differences. The Chola bronzes are found to have more of tin in them than the Pallava period. So this is how we can use technology to come to the aid of gaining more insights also into the issues of art history, stylistic classification, and provenance. And these point to the scope of studies of archaeometallurgy and ethnoarchaeology in better understanding our metallurgical heritage. So, in summary, the Chola bronzes were made using rather sophisticated techniques of lost wax image casting, which has an early history in the subcontinent. The skill of casting bronzes in the Chola period were unmatched, and the majority of images were solid cast of leaded bronze. It is also found that by the Pallava period, already images of great skill were being cast, including dancing images of Shiva. The great patrons of Chola art included Rajaraja, Sembian Mahadevi, and Rajendra Chola, while a range of iconographic formulations were being cast, along with the bronzes of the Tamil poet saint. Indeed, the Nataraja bronze, which has been much acclaimed by philosophers and artists around the world, was also famously described by the celebrated French sculptor Auguste Rodin as une chose divinement réglée, or something divinely ordered, and points to the fame which the art of the Cholas occupies in the popular imagination. The e-text gives more material and also gives a reference list of appropriate reading to accompany the module. Thank you.